Florida announced that it is dropping all vaccine mandates. It's going to lead to a lot of problems for that state, which already has a lot of vaccine hesitancy. Once we lose the parents who've only vaccinated their children so they could go to school, you're going to find Florida losing herd immunity, as will the rest of the country, unless there is a significant shift in the overall thinking of our vaccine program. A survey done in 1991 showed that over 90% of the individuals thought the vaccine program was an important factor of public health. In 2024, that same study showed only 60%. And the reason for the decline is probably that we don't see these horrible diseases anymore, and we've lost appreciation for what the vaccine program has actually done for the medical community and the overall public health. In this video, I'm going to discuss 4 disease states that were easily preventable with safe and simple vaccinations. 3 of them you've heard about, but I bet you the 4th one, which scared me the most personally, you've never heard about. But before we start, I just want to say something. I had made a video on the mRNA vaccine, and I lost a lot of subscribers, but that's okay. I do this as a public service to educate people. I'm not doing this to become some kind of a boomer influencer. So if you think this is going to be a politicized video, you're wrong. I think you should watch it because it's going to negatively affect your grandchildren and future generations. You see, if you're 60 years old, these changes aren't going to affect you. If your children are 30 years old or older, they're probably okay. But your grandkids and their children are going to live in a world of hurt if we go back to 1915 pre-vaccination America. Polio, a preventable viral illness that affects the nervous system. If you're like me, just under 70 years old, and grew up in a cosmopolitan city, you knew every block had the polio kid, and we would go out to play, and there would be 1 or 2 kids with crutches or braces on their leg like Forrest Gump that seemed to be bolted into the heels of their shoes. And we knew on every block there was a family touched by this illness. And as soon as the vaccine became available, our parents couldn't wait to get us vaccinated because every spring and early summer, a whole bunch of kids became infected with this. Some did well, some became paralyzed, and some died. Polio is a very insidious disease because the most common presentation is to have no symptoms at all. And you walked around asymptomatic, shedding virus to everyone you met. The worst case scenario was the paralytic poliomyelitis. That involves the spinal cord and the brainstem. And you would get a progressive weakness, mostly of the lower extremities. If you were lucky, it stopped at just giving you a funny gait. But you could have become paralyzed and wound up in a wheelchair. If it involved the brainstem, you lost your ability to breathe and had to be put into an iron lung. If you've ever seen an iron lung, it's this horrific looking industrial piece of machinery. Huge bolts, port windows on the side like some kind of submarine. And you couldn't bear but to think, I wonder who was in here. I wonder how long they were in here for. I wonder if they survived. Here's a picture of some nurses with children in iron lungs. These children may have spent months in there or their whole life in there. Now, that's the early days. Today, the child would end up on a ventilator with a trach. Diphtheria, a bacterial infection of the upper airway, known to create a thick mucous membrane that went from tonsil to tonsil, making it very difficult to breathe, especially if you were an infant, and many of them became apneic and couldn't breathe. Diphtheria requires immediate antibiotic treatment, and even with that, you could have long-term complications, from respiratory failure to heart, lung, and kidney disease. And it was easily preventable with the DTaP vaccine, given at 2 months, 4 months, 6 months, and then a booster at 5 years. Pertussis, an upper respiratory infection from Bordetella pertussis bacteria. It's also known as whooping cough. It sounds kind of fun. However, it can be deadly. You have about a 10-day incubation period, and then you show signs of like a mild cold. But by the end of 2 weeks, you develop a persistent severe cough. Such a severe cough that if you're an adult, you could break a rib. If you're a child or even an infant, you could cough so much that you can't catch your breath and become apneic. And this severe cough could last for months. If you're under 1 year of age, you could get serious complications. 68% of those children will become apneic, in other words, stop breathing. 21% will get a pneumonia. 2% will have seizures, and then some will get an encephalopathy. Very rare though, under 0.6%. Unfortunately, 1 to 2 out of every 100 children who develop pertussis will die. And it's very unfortunate because it's easily preventable with the DPT vaccine. Epiglottitis, the infection that scared me personally the most, and you might not have ever heard about it. The epiglottis is a cartilaginous structure that protects your airway. If it becomes inflamed, usually with Haemophilus influenza B, which happens to be the most common bacteria to cause bacterial meningitis in children, it becomes markedly swollen. Here's a photograph of epiglottitis. The airway on the left is normal. The airway on the right has epiglottitis. You can see it's extremely swollen. And it's an emergency because the person could stop breathing. Whenever I got called to the emergency room to intubate a child with epiglottitis, my heart would be pounding as I ran through the hallway because I knew what I was going to find when I got there, and I knew the 4 possible outcomes from what I had to do. I knew that I would walk in the room and I would see some child looking completely toxic, sitting up, leaning forward, drooling, can't swallow, and stridorous breathing because his airway is partially occluded. And I knew that before I even touched the child, there was a potential that an epiglottis might close off their airway completely and they're going to need an emergency tracheotomy. I also knew that when I went to do my laryngoscopy, there were 4 things that could have happened. I could have put in the laryngoscope and caused spasm of that larynx, closing off his airway by my own doing. Or I could have looked with the laryngoscope and not been able to see anything because it's too swollen. The next case would be I look in, I could see the cords, but I can't get to them due to this swelling and I can't intubate. And the 4th one would be I go in, I see the vocal cords, I insert the endotracheal tube, put them on a ventilator, and I hope that they recover from this illness. You might say, well, what's the big deal if they obstruct? They're going to need a tracheotomy. Well, Dr. McDreamy on the TV show does it very easily. But when you have a young child who obstructs their airway and is using oxygen at a rate of twice an adult, they become hypoxic very quickly. They'll turn blue and go unconscious. Then their EKG QRS complex is going to widen before they go into complete cardiac arrest. And the amount of tension and excitement going on in that room is going to make an emergency tracheotomy a pretty difficult thing to accomplish, even if you're a board-certified ENT. So the epiglottitis was always a potential catastrophe from beginning to end. And fortunately, they came out with the HIB vaccine, Haemophilus influenza B. Once they started using the vaccine, the amount of times I got called to the emergency room to intubate one of these children became negligible. I might get an adult. An adult was a completely different situation, much easier. But that HIB vaccine was a true lifesaver when it came to epiglottitis. And unfortunately, unless things change, we're going to lose all these wonderful modalities. So I hope you learned something in this video. And if you do like my videos, I wouldn't mind a thumbs up, click subscribe, and hit the bell for future videos. Take care. Have a good day.